The first thing I heard was my father's laugh. Not the nervous laugh people make when they are uncomfortable. Not the laugh of someone trying to soften a mistake. It was the confident laugh of a man who believed he had already won. I was standing in my childhood living room, surrounded by neighbors, family friends, and a couple I had never met before. The same hardwood floor where I had taken my first steps was covered with moving boxes. My mother's old curtains were still hanging by the windows, but somehow the house already felt like it belonged to someone else. And then the woman standing beside the front door smiled at me and said, "Claire, thank you for being so flexible about the sale. Robert told us everything was already approved." I looked at her. Then I looked at my father. "My name is Claire Bennett. I was 39 years old when my father sold the family house behind my back. Actually, he didn't just sell it. He announced the sale like I was a distant relative who had forgotten to send a birthday card. My father, Robert Bennett, lifted his glass and smiled at everyone in the room. "Claire has always been emotional about this place," he said. "But she understands that life moves on." I remember feeling the words hit me harder than I expected, because I did understand that life moved on. I understood that my mother had died 8 years earlier. I understood that houses were sold. I understood that people changed. What I did not understand was how my father could stand inside the home my mother spent decades building and pretend I had no connection to it. Then my younger brother Ethan spoke. "You know how Dad is," he said casually. "He's trying to retire. It's not fair to make everything complicated over memories." Everything complicated. That was the phrase my family always used whenever I asked for basic respect. I looked around the room and realized something painful. Everyone there thought I was the problem. They thought I was the difficult daughter who could not let go. They thought I was about to create drama over money. They thought my father had done everything correctly, but they didn't know what I had inside my bag. They didn't know about the certified court document sitting only a few feet away from my father's celebration dinner, a document that proved one thing he never expected me to say out loud. He needed my approval. Before I continue, I want to say something to anyone listening who has ever been made to feel like the difficult one in their family. Sometimes the person who asks questions is not causing the problem. Sometimes they are the only person brave enough to notice one exists. If you have ever experienced something similar, I hope you stay until the end of this story, because the moment my family realized the truth changed everything. I looked at my father and asked the question that changed the entire room. Whose signature is supposed to be on the consent page? The smile disappeared from his face for half a second. It was quick, almost impossible to notice. But I noticed, because I had spent my entire life noticing small things about my family. My father recovered quickly. "The paperwork is finished," he said. "Don't embarrass yourself, Claire." A few people looked away. A few pretended not to hear. And Ethan gave me the same expression he had given me since childhood. The expression that said he believed he was the reasonable one and I was the problem. But I did not argue. I did not cry. I did not give my father the emotional reaction he expected. I simply placed my hand on my bag and felt the edge of the folder inside. Because what my father did not know was that the house he was celebrating selling was not completely his to sell. But to understand why that moment hurt so deeply, I have to take you back. Because this was never only about a house. It was about a lifetime of being treated like I was useful, but never truly important. My mother, Diane Bennett, was the heart of our family. She was the person who remembered everyone's birthdays, made every holiday feel special, and somehow turned an ordinary 2-story house outside Columbus, Ohio, into a place where people wanted to gather. My father was different. In public, Robert was charming. He shook hands, told jokes, and made people believe he was generous and dependable. At home, especially when money or control was involved, he had another side. He believed decisions should happen his way, and in our family, Ethan was usually the person who benefited from that. Ethan was 4 years younger than me, and from the time we were children, everyone treated him like he was the one with unlimited potential. If Ethan made a mistake, people said he was learning. If I made a mistake, people said I should know better. I became the responsible daughter. The one who helped, the one who adjusted, the one who forgave. When my mother passed away, the house became part of a legal process because it had been in her name. The court-approved family settlement gave my father 50% ownership and the right to remain living there. Ethan and I each received 25%. I never tried to take the house from my father. I never wanted him removed. That was never my intention. I believed my mother would have wanted him to have a home, but my father slowly began telling a different story. A story where I was the daughter who walked away. The daughter who cared more about documents than family. The daughter who needed to be reminded where she belonged. And that story became dangerous, because the more people believed it, the easier it became for my father to believe something else. That my silence meant permission. That my patience meant weakness. And that was exactly what I had been fighting against my entire life. The first time I realized my family had created a role for me was not during the house sale. It happened years earlier. It happened so gradually that I almost did not notice it. Families rarely break people in one dramatic moment. Sometimes they do it through hundreds of small moments, where one person is always expected to give more, understand more, and need less. That was my role. I was the dependable one. Growing up, I learned very quickly that being responsible was both a compliment and a punishment. When I was 16, I started working weekends at a small bookstore near our neighborhood. I wanted to save money for college, and I was proud that I could pay for some of my own things. Ethan, meanwhile, spent most of his allowance on video games and hobbies. My father would laugh and say, "Let him enjoy being young. Boys need confidence." But when I wanted to buy something for myself, I heard a different message. "You know money doesn't grow on trees, Claire." I did not think much about it back then. I thought that was just how families worked. I thought older daughters were supposed to be more mature. I thought being the person everyone relied on was something to be proud of. But over time, I realized something. People can appreciate your reliability so much that they stop seeing you as a person. They start seeing you as a resource. After college, I became the person everyone called when something went wrong. If my father needed help understanding an insurance letter, he called me. If my mother needed someone to organize medical appointments, she called me. If Ethan needed advice after making another questionable decision, somehow my father expected me to help clean up the consequences. And I did, because I loved my family. That was the part that always confused people when they looked at my situation from the outside. They thought if I was hurt, I must not have cared. But the truth was the opposite. I cared so much that I kept accepting things that slowly damaged me. After Mom died, that pattern became even stronger. The house became the symbol of everything complicated in our family. It was where my mother's memories lived. It was where family holidays happened. It was where I still expected to feel connected to the people I loved. But my father started treating the house like it was his personal bargaining tool. When the furnace broke one winter, he called me late at night. "Your mother would want us to take care of this place," he said. I remember standing in my kitchen, holding my phone, listening to the heater in my own house running. "I'll help with the repair," I told him. And I did. I paid half, but a few weeks later I heard my father telling relatives that Ethan had stepped up and handled everything. I stood there at a family dinner and listened as everyone praised my brother for a bill I had helped pay. When I mentioned it afterward, my father sighed. "Claire, why do you always need recognition?" That question stayed with me, because I was not asking for applause. I was asking not to be erased. The same thing happened with property taxes. There was a year when my father was short on money, and he promised he would repay me after selling some investments. I covered the amount. The repayment never came. When I reminded him months later, he looked annoyed. "You have a good job. Why are you keeping track of every little thing?" Every little thing. That was always how my concerns were treated, as if details only mattered when they helped someone else. The hardest moment came when Ethan removed some of my mother's belongings from the house without asking. My mother's old sewing cabinet was one of those things. It was not expensive. It was not valuable to anyone looking at a price tag. But it was something my mother touched every day. When I found out Ethan had taken it, I called my father. I wish someone had asked me first. My father became defensive immediately. "Oh, please, Claire. It's a cabinet. Stop making everything emotional." That sentence hurt more than the cabinet being gone, because I finally understood. My feelings were not the problem. The problem was that my feelings were inconvenient, and every time I tried to explain that, my family turned the conversation into an argument about my attitude. They called me sensitive, difficult, too serious. Meanwhile, Ethan could disappear for months and return with another problem, and everyone rushed to help him. He was always given another chance. I was always expected to be the person who understood. That was the family pattern. Ethan was protected. I was prepared. Ethan was forgiven. I was judged. And the more I stepped back, the more my father believed I had stopped caring. He did not understand that I was not leaving because I did not love them. I was creating distance because I was tired of begging people to treat me fairly. The strange thing was, my father thought my quietness meant I had lost interest. He thought because I did not fight every argument anymore, I had given up. He was wrong. I had simply learned that arguing with people who refuse to listen only teaches them how to ignore you better. So instead of fighting, I started preparing. I saved every message. I kept every receipt. I stored every important document, not because I expected a battle, because life had already shown me something important. Family promises are beautiful, but when money, property, or fear enter the room, promises are not always enough. That lesson became even more important because my father never knew what I had built outside that house. He still saw me as the daughter who needed approval. He never saw the woman I had become. For 14 years, I had worked in real estate risk and closing compliance for a regional bank. My father used to joke about my job. "Claire spends her days reading paperwork," he would say. He made it sound boring, unimportant, like I was pushing papers around instead of building a career. But the truth was, my work taught me something my family never understood. Paperwork matters. Details matter. Ownership matters. A single sentence in a legal document can change everything. I reviewed property files every week. I looked at title problems, ownership disputes, missing signatures, incorrect transfers. I saw how ordinary people lost money because they trusted someone's word instead of checking the documents. And because of that, after the probate process ended, I kept copies of everything: the court order, the settlement agreement, the recorded documents. I stored them digitally and kept physical copies in a secure folder. My father thought I was being overly cautious. He never asked why. He never cared. 7 days before the dinner, where he announced the sale, I received an unexpected call from a title examiner. She sounded professional but careful. "Ms. Bennett, I'm reviewing a property transaction involving the Bennett residence. I wanted to confirm some information regarding your ownership interest." My stomach tightened. Ownership interest. Those words immediately told me something was wrong. I asked her what she meant. She explained that during the title search, my name appeared in the ownership records. She also mentioned that the seller had provided information suggesting he had full authority to complete the sale. I did not panic. I did not accuse anyone. I simply thanked her and requested a certified copy of the records. Then I called Maya Patel, an attorney who specialized in property matters. And that was when I learned something my father never expected. The documents he thought nobody would read carefully were about to become the one thing he could not ignore. Because my father had spent years believing I was the daughter who would always step aside, he never considered that the same daughter he underestimated had been quietly preparing for the moment someone tried to erase her. And now, for the first time in my life, I was not trying to convince my family that I mattered. I was about to prove it. For years, I believed I had to handle everything alone. That was probably the biggest mistake I made. I was so used to being the person who carried everyone else's problems that I forgot what it felt like to have someone stand beside me. But there was one person who had never completely believed the version of me my father created: my Aunt Nora. Nora was my mother's older sister, and she had always been different from the rest of my family. She did not compete for attention. She did not take sides just because someone was louder. And she never treated me like I was difficult simply because I asked questions. When my mother was alive, Nora was the person who would sit with me at the kitchen table after family gatherings and quietly ask, "Are you okay?" Not, "Why are you upset?" Not, "Can you just let it go?" Just, "Are you okay?" After I received the call from the title examiner, I sat in my car outside Nora's house for almost 10 minutes before walking inside. I remember holding the steering wheel and wondering if I was overreacting. That was something my family had trained me to do. Question myself before questioning anyone else. When Nora opened the door, she immediately knew something was wrong. "Claire," she said softly. "What happened?" I tried to explain everything. The sale, the dinner, the buyer, the missing signature. My father acting like my ownership did not exist. I expected her to tell me to calm down. I expected her to say something about keeping peace. Instead, she sat quietly and listened. When I finished, she looked at me and said something I will never forget. "Claire, your father has been confusing your kindness with permission for a very long time." I felt my eyes fill with tears. Not because she was saying something new, because someone finally said it out loud. Nora walked to a small wooden cabinet near her living room and pulled out an envelope. "I have been waiting to give this to you," she said. Inside was a copy of an email my father had sent years earlier. It was from shortly after my mother's funeral. In the email, my father complained that I was still holding on to 25% of the property. I read that sentence twice, because it confirmed something important. He knew. He had always known. He was not confused. He was not mistaken. He knew exactly what my ownership was. He just believed that eventually I would give in. Nora explained that after my mother died, my father had tried to get me to sign documents. "He told you they were just routine paperwork," she said. I remembered that. I remembered sitting at the dining room table with a stack of papers in front of me. I remembered my father saying, "Everyone else has signed. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." At the time, I did not fully understand what I was signing away, but something about it felt wrong, so I refused. And my father never forgave me for that. Nora also gave me something else, a sealed envelope from my mother. My mother had left it with Nora during the probate process. It was not a legal document. It could not change ownership. But it was a letter explaining what my mother wanted. She wrote that she hoped the house would remain a place of love, not a place where family members fought over control. She wrote that she wanted my father protected, but she also wanted Ethan and me treated fairly. Reading those words was painful, because my mother understood something my father never did. Fairness and love were not opposites, they were supposed to exist together. Nora then introduced me to Maya Patel, a property attorney she trusted. Maya was calm, practical, and exactly what I needed. She did not make dramatic statements. She did not promise me victory. She simply reviewed the documents. After several minutes, she looked up. "Claire, your father may have signed a purchase agreement," she said, "but that does not mean he can transfer ownership he does not control." Those words gave me a strange feeling. Not excitement, not revenge, relief. Because for the first time I knew I was not imagining what happened. Maya explained that the next steps had to be careful. We needed the sales contract, the closing documents, the appraisal information. Everything had to be documented. My goal was not to punish my father. I did not want him homeless. I did not want a family war. I wanted the truth. I wanted the process my mother's estate had already established to be respected. Maya suggested sending a formal request for the documents before taking any further action. I agreed. I still hoped my father might choose honesty once he realized I knew. I was wrong. The next morning, I sent the request. I kept it respectful. I did not accuse him. I simply asked for the information needed, because my ownership interest had never been resolved. Hours passed, no response. Then my phone buzzed. It was not a private message from my father. It was a family group chat. A message from Robert Bennett. Everyone was invited to a special celebration dinner at the house that weekend. The message said, "Come celebrate the next chapter for our family." I stared at those words. The next chapter. My father was celebrating a future that had been built without me. And what happened next would show me exactly how far he was willing to go to make everyone believe his version of the story. The week before the dinner felt strangely normal from the outside. That was what made it harder. There was no huge argument, no dramatic warning. Just small reminders that my family had already moved forward without asking if I was coming with them. Ethan posted pictures online of boxes stacked in the house. He wrote, One last weekend, in the place where everything started. People commented with memories. They talked about holidays, birthdays, family dinners. Nobody mentioned that one of the owners had not agreed to sell. Nobody asked why I had not been told. Then Dad sent me a private message. Bring Mom's photo albums to the dinner. Everyone would like to see them one more time. I stared at the screen. That was the part that hurt the most. Even after everything, he still expected me to provide the emotional pieces of the family history he was trying to erase. He wanted my mother's memories. He wanted my help creating the perfect goodbye, but he did not want my voice. I replied with one sentence. I'll be there. I did not explain. I did not argue. I had learned something important. Sometimes people reveal more when you stop warning them. The day before the dinner, I received another message, this time from Ethan. You need to stop making Dad stressed. This is a big moment for him. I read it carefully, not because I was surprised, because it confirmed everything. To Ethan, my father's stress mattered. My rights did not. I asked him one question. Did you know about the sale before I did? There was a long pause. Then he replied, Dad didn't think you needed to be involved until everything was settled. That sentence stayed with me. Until everything was settled. Meaning, they wanted me involved only after my signature was no longer important. That was when I understood the real plan. They did not want my agreement. They wanted my surrender. On the afternoon of the dinner, I drove to the old house carrying the court documents in my bag. I also carried something else. A decision. I was done trying to convince people who had already decided who I was. I was not going there to fight. I was going there because the truth deserved to be present in that room. And I had no idea that by the end of that night, my father would place the very document I needed to see directly in front of me. A document with my name on it, and a blank space where my approval was supposed to be. I knew something was wrong the moment I walked into the house. Not because anyone said anything, because everyone was acting like a decision had already been made. The living room looked almost exactly the same as it had for years. The old wooden shelves, the family photographs, the fireplace where my mother used to hang stockings every Christmas. But there was a strange feeling in the air, like I was not walking into my childhood home. I was walking into a room where everyone had already agreed on my role. The person who would eventually give in. My father greeted me with a smile. There she is, he said loudly. Our lawyer daughter. A few people laughed. It was meant to sound like a joke. But I knew my father well enough to understand what he was really doing. He was reminding everyone that I was the difficult one. The serious one. The person who made simple things complicated. I smiled politely and hugged a few relatives who had arrived. Then I noticed something. There were printed papers on the dining room table. A folder, a pen, and a space that looked intentionally prepared. My stomach tightened. I sat beside Aunt Nora and watched as my father moved around the room, shaking hands and accepting congratulations. He was enjoying the moment, the attention, the feeling that everything was finally going his way. After dinner, he stood up and tapped his glass. Everyone became quiet. I just want to say how grateful I am, he began. This house has given our family so many memories, but eventually you have to move forward. People nodded, some smiled. I looked at the walls, at the pictures of my mother, at the place where I had spent my childhood. And I wondered how my father could speak about memories while removing the person who helped create them. Then he continued. The sale is official. The buyers are wonderful people, and honestly, this is going to help the family. I felt my chest tighten. The family, that phrase. My father always used it when he wanted someone to sacrifice something. Then he looked at Ethan. Your brother has had a difficult year with his business, and this gives him a chance to start fresh. There it was, the real reason, not retirement, not moving on, not simply selling a house. The money already had a destination. Ethan smiled and looked down. Everyone knew. Everyone except me. Or at least that was what they thought. A few people clapped. Someone said, "That's wonderful, Robert." My father looked proud. Then he looked at me. And Claire understands. She knows family comes first. That sentence was supposed to corner me. It was supposed to make me either agree publicly or look selfish. For most of my life, that strategy worked, but not anymore. I placed my fork down. Actually, I said calmly, I have a question. The room became quieter. My father smiled. Of course you do. A few people laughed nervously. I ignored it. Why was I not told about the sale before the contract was signed? My father leaned back. Because there was nothing to discuss. Nothing to discuss. Those words felt heavier than an insult. Because they revealed exactly what he believed, that my opinion was optional. That my ownership was something he could simply overlook. I think there was something to discuss, I said. Ethan sighed. Claire, seriously? Don't do this tonight. I turned toward him. Do what? He looked uncomfortable. Make everything about paperwork. That was when I realized something. They had all accepted the same story. The story where I was not protecting myself. I was ruining things. My father stood up. You have always been like this. Everything becomes a negotiation with you. I looked at him. The man who had called me every time he needed help. The man who asked me to fix problems. The man who depended on me when things were difficult. And suddenly, I saw the pattern clearly. He wanted my responsibility, but he did not want my authority. I'm not negotiating, I said. I'm asking why my ownership was ignored. My father's expression changed. You don't own this house. The room went silent. I felt everyone watching me, waiting for my reaction. He continued. You haven't lived here in years. You moved away. You built your own life. You don't get to suddenly act like this is yours. I looked around the room. Nobody corrected him. Nobody reminded him. So I did. I do have an ownership interest, my father laughed. No, Claire, you have memories. That's different. That sentence hurt, because it was exactly how he had always reduced me. My connection to the family was emotional, never legitimate. Then Ethan joined in. You have a good career, you own a house. Why are you fighting Dad over this? I looked at him. I'm not fighting him over the house. Then what is this about? I answered honestly. Respect. Nobody spoke. My father reached for the folder on the table. I knew this would happen. He opened it. Inside was a printed consent page. My name was at the top. My information was already filled in. Only one thing was missing. My signature. This is all you need to do, he said. The way he said it made my stomach turn. Not can you review this, not can we discuss this, just, this is all you need to do. Like my signature was a favor. Like my approval was a formality. Like my entire connection to the house could disappear with one pen stroke. You want me to sign this tonight? I asked. My father looked around the room. I want you to stop making this harder than it needs to be. There it was again. The same sentence. The same pressure. The same expectation that I would choose peace over myself. I picked up the document. I read the first page, then the second. Then I placed it back on the table. I'm not signing this. The room changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but everyone felt it. My father's face hardened. Claire. I stayed calm. I need to review this. You don't trust your own father? I almost laughed. Because trust was exactly what had brought me there. I trusted him enough to believe he would tell me the truth. He didn't. I need to understand what I'm signing. My father shook his head. This is unbelievable. Ethan looked embarrassed. Claire, Dad is trying to retire. Why are you doing this? I looked at my brother. Because no one asked me. My father stood up. You are willing to ruin this for everyone over paperwork. And that was the moment I understood. They were not angry because I was wrong. They were angry because I was no longer easy to control. I closed the folder. I'm not ruining anything. I'm asking for the same thing anyone else would ask for. My father lowered his voice. You always think you're smarter than everyone. I looked at him. No, I just think my signature should mean something. The silence after that was uncomfortable, because nobody had a response. Not a real one. My father finally said the words I knew he wanted to say from the beginning. If you cared about this family, you would sign. I felt something inside me become very still. For years, I had tried to prove that I cared. I had helped, paid, organized, forgiven. But standing there, I finally understood something. A person can spend years proving their love and still be accused of not loving enough. So I stood up. I placed the document back on the table, and I walked away. Not because I had lost, because I was done begging for a seat at a table where my voice was never wanted. The next morning, Maya called me. Her voice was calm, but serious. "Claire, the title company reviewed the file." I sat down. "What did they find?" There was a pause. Then she answered. "They found the probate order." My heart started beating faster. "What does that mean?" "It means your father's sale may not be able to proceed." I closed my eyes. After everything my father had said the night before, after all the confidence and humiliation, there was one thing he had forgotten. The truth was not based on who spoke the loudest. It was written down, and now that document was about to speak for me. The next day, Maya and I reviewed every page of the probate file. Not because I wanted revenge, because I needed certainty. The certified court order was clear. My father owned 50% of the property. He had the right to live there, but Ethan and I each owned 25%, and there was a specific condition: the property could not be sold, transferred, or mortgaged without written approval from all owners. My signature was not a courtesy, it was not a family request, it was a legal requirement. Maya looked at me across the conference table. "Claire, this changes everything." I looked down at the document. The same document my father probably assumed nobody would ever read carefully. The same document that proved he had spent months planning a sale he did not have complete authority to make. Then Maya showed me something else. The sales contract. My father had represented that he could deliver clear ownership to the buyers, but he could not. Not without me. Then Nora sent us the old email, the one where my father admitted I still owned 25%. Maya read it quietly. Then she looked up. "This is important." Because he knew? Exactly. That was the part that hurt the most. He did not forget me. He counted on me disappearing. I looked at the papers in front of me. For years, I had believed my father's biggest weapon was his anger. It wasn't. It was his confidence that nobody would challenge him, but that confidence was about to disappear. Because now I had something I never had before. Proof, and for the first time I was ready to stop explaining. I was ready to let the truth do the talking. The meeting at the title company was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. I remember that because I almost canceled 3 times. Not because I was afraid of the truth. I was afraid of what the truth would change. There is a strange thing that happens when you finally get proof that someone hurt you intentionally. Part of you feels relieved, but another part of you grieves. Because once you know someone chose to disrespect you, you cannot return to pretending it was an accident. I arrived 10 minutes early. The title company's office was in a modern glass building downtown. It was the kind of place designed to make everything feel professional and neutral. Gray chairs, white walls, conference rooms with long tables and no personal decorations. It felt nothing like my childhood home. And maybe that was appropriate. The house was where emotions had controlled the conversation. This room was where documents would. A few minutes later, Maya arrived with a folder under her arm. "You ready?" she asked. I nodded. "I think so." She looked at me carefully. "Remember, Claire, you don't have to prove that you are a good person in this room." That sentence stayed with me. Because for years, that was exactly what I had been trying to do. I had been trying to prove I was not selfish. I was not difficult. I was not the daughter who abandoned everyone. But today was not about proving my character. It was about correcting a record. When we entered the conference room, my father was already there. He looked different. Not physically, emotionally. The confidence he had carried at the dinner was gone. But he was still trying to hold on to control. Ethan sat beside him. Across the table were Mark, the buyer, his attorney, and Olivia from the title company. Everyone greeted each other politely, the kind of politeness people use when they know something serious is about to happen. My father looked at me. "You really took this that far?" I sat down. "I didn't take it anywhere. The documents brought us here." He shook his head. "Always the documents." I did not answer, because I finally understood something. My father hated paperwork when paperwork disagreed with him. Olivia opened the meeting. "Thank you, everyone, for attending. Our purpose today is to clarify ownership and determine whether this transaction can proceed." She opened the title report. The room became quiet. This property has multiple recorded ownership interests. My father shifted in his chair. Olivia continued. Robert Bennett holds a 50% interest. Ethan Bennett holds 25%. Claire Bennett holds 25%. Hearing my name spoken professionally felt strange, not because I did not know it was true, because my family had spent years making me feel like it was not. My father interrupted. There must be some misunderstanding. Maya looked at him. There is no misunderstanding. The records are clear. My father leaned forward. Claire moved away years ago. She doesn't live there. She hasn't contributed to the house. I looked at him. There it was, the argument he had been building for years. That because I had built my own life, I had somehow given up my place in the family. But ownership was not based on who was physically present. And neither was love. Maya placed the probate order on the table. This court-approved agreement established the ownership percentages and restrictions. She pointed to the section. The sale of the entire property requires written approval from all vested owners. Silence. Real silence. The kind where nobody knows what to say next. Mark looked at his attorney, then back at my father. You told us you had authority to sell the property. My father immediately responded. I do have authority. Maya calmly answered. You have authority over your interest, not over everyone else's. That sentence changed the atmosphere, because until that moment, my father had been speaking like this was a disagreement between a father and daughter. But suddenly, everyone in the room understood. This was not a family argument. This was a property transaction based on inaccurate information. My father looked uncomfortable. Then he tried a different approach. Claire is doing this because she's angry. I looked at him. Angry. That was always easier for people to accept. They preferred believing I was emotional instead of considering that I had a valid point. Maya looked at me. I nodded. She placed another document on the table. The email. My father's own words. The message where he referred to my 25% ownership. Mark's attorney read it quietly. Then he looked at my father. You were aware of her ownership? My father looked away. I knew she had some connection to it. Some connection. I almost laughed. After everything. After years of calling me sentimental. After telling people I had no claim. Now it was suddenly some connection. Nora, who had been sitting quietly beside me, spoke. I was there when Robert asked Claire to sign documents after Diane died. Everyone looked at her. He told her they were routine. Claire refused because she wanted time to understand what she was signing. My father sighed. Nora, this is not helpful. She looked at him. No, it is just true. That was the difference. For years, my father had controlled the story because nobody challenged him. But truth has a way of becoming stronger when more than one person remembers it. Then Ethan finally spoke. This is ridiculous. Everyone turned toward him. He looked frustrated. Dad needs this money. His condo is already planned. My business needs help. Claire doesn't even need the money. There it was, the sentence I had expected, the belief my family had carried for years. Because I was stable, my needs did not matter. Because I was responsible, I was supposed to sacrifice. I looked at my brother. I'm not stopping you from getting what belongs to you. He frowned. Then what do you want? I thought about that question, because honestly, years ago, I would have answered differently. I would have wanted an apology. I would have wanted my father to finally admit he treated me unfairly. I would have wanted my brother to understand how much I had carried. But sitting there, I realized something. I could not force people to become the people I needed them to be. So I answered honestly. I want honesty. The room stayed quiet. I want decisions involving my name to involve me. I want agreements to mean what they say. I want people to stop calling me selfish when I refuse to disappear. My father looked down. For the first time, he did not have an immediate response. Then he said quietly, So you're going to destroy my retirement? I looked at him. No. My voice was calm. I'm not destroying anything. I'm refusing to take responsibility for choices I did not make. That was the moment something inside me changed, because I was not fighting for the house anymore. I was fighting for the woman I had spent years ignoring. The woman who deserved to be heard. Maya explained the options. The current sale could not proceed. The property would need a new appraisal. All owners would need to agree on the next step. Either my father and Ethan could buy out my share fairly, or the house could be listed properly. No secret deals, no pressure, no missing signatures. The truth was finally in the room, and the truth did not need to shout. It had proof. The consequences did not happen overnight. That would have made the story easier, but real life usually does not work that way. There was no dramatic moment where my father suddenly apologized and everyone admitted I was right. Instead, there were uncomfortable conversations. Financial consequences, family members quietly changing the way they looked at him. The private sale with Mark collapsed. The buyers received their money back according to the agreement, but my father was responsible for costs created by the inaccurate information provided during the transaction. His planned move became complicated. The condo he wanted was no longer available because he missed the deadline, and Ethan's expected rescue money disappeared. That was probably the hardest thing for both of them, not losing everything, not being destroyed, just being forced to deal with reality. For the first time, nobody was stepping in to fix Ethan's mistake. He had to face the consequences of his own decisions. A few weeks later, mediation began. The independent appraisal came back. The house was worth significantly more than Mark's private offer, almost $75,000 more. When my father saw the number, he became quiet. Because suddenly the story changed. The daughter he accused of being greedy had actually protected everyone from losing money. The private deal that was supposed to help the family would have benefited one buyer and one person's urgency. Not everyone. During mediation, my father still tried to argue. "You make more money than everyone else. You don't need this." I looked at him. "I'm not asking because I need it." I paused. "I'm asking because it belongs to me." That was something I had never said before. Not just to him, to myself. The final agreement took months. The house was listed properly, every offer was reviewed, every expense was documented, and when the house finally sold, the proceeds were divided according to the court order. Fairly, legally, exactly the way they should have been from the beginning. My father still had enough money to live comfortably. Ethan received his share, but he did not receive the unlimited rescue he expected, and that was the consequence neither of them wanted to accept. They had spent years believing I was the person who would always give more. They never imagined I would be the person who finally said no. The strangest part was not the sale. It was what happened afterward. The relatives who had watched my father embarrass me slowly started asking questions. Some apologized, some admitted they had believed his version without knowing the facts, and some simply avoided the subject because admitting they were wrong was uncomfortable. I did not chase anyone for an apology. I did not need a room full of people telling me I was right. I already knew. The final message from my father came 3 days after the sale was completed. It was short. Only one sentence. "The house is gone. Maybe now you can finally put family before paperwork." I stared at that message for a long time, because even after everything, he still did not understand. The paperwork was never the reason our family broke. It was the evidence of what had already happened. For a long time, I thought the hardest part would be proving the truth. I thought the hardest moment would be sitting across from my father, while everyone finally understood what had happened. I was wrong. The hardest part came afterward. Because once the conflict was over, I had to decide what kind of relationship I wanted with the people who caused it. And that decision was much harder than any legal document. My father changed after the sale. Not completely, not magically, but enough that I noticed. The anger became less direct. The accusations became softer. Instead of saying I was selfish, he started saying he was hurt. Instead of saying I ruined everything, he said he wished things had been handled differently. At first, I wanted to believe that meant he finally understood. I wanted to believe that maybe losing control of the situation forced him to see what he had done. But then I noticed something. His apologies were always followed by a request. A favor, an expectation, a way back into the old pattern. A few months after the sale, he called me on a Sunday afternoon. I almost did not answer, but I did. "Claire," he said. His voice sounded tired. Not angry, just tired. "How are you?" It was such a normal question that for a moment, I forgot everything. Then I remembered. The dinner. The folder. The blank signature line. The way he looked at me like I was the problem for wanting honesty. "I'm doing okay," I said. There was a pause. Then he sighed. "I just wish things had not gotten so complicated." I looked out my kitchen window, the same kitchen where I had once stood paying his bills, solving his problems, and wondering why helping never seemed to make me feel closer to my family. "Dad, things became complicated because I was excluded." "I know," he said quickly, but the way he said it made me realize he wanted the conversation to move past that sentence. Not through it, past it. "I was under pressure," he continued. "You know, Ethan was struggling. I was trying to help him." I closed my eyes. There it was, the explanation. Not an apology, a reason. "I understand you were scared," I said, "but being scared does not give someone permission to make decisions for me." He became quiet. Then he said something I had heard many times before. "You're still my daughter." I smiled sadly, because that sentence used to work. It used to make me immediately soften. It used to make me question myself. But I finally understood something. Being someone's daughter does not mean accepting everything they do. Love does not require losing yourself. "I know I'm your daughter," I replied. "That's why this hurts so much." Another silence, a real one. Then he asked, "Can we just go back to normal?" I looked around my home. My home, the one I had built myself, the one where I did not have to earn my place. And I answered honestly, I don't think normal was ever healthy for me. That was not easy to say, because part of me still wanted the father I remembered from childhood. The father who carried groceries into the house, the father who taught me how to ride a bike, the father who used to sit beside my bed when I was sick. But that person existed alongside another person, a person who had spent years believing my kindness meant I would always surrender. I told him what I needed moving forward. No more asking me for money, no more making decisions involving me without including me, no more using mom's memory to pressure me, and no more conversations where I was expected to apologize for protecting myself. He listened, then he said, "Families shouldn't need rules." I looked down at my coffee cup, the same cup I had been holding for several minutes. "Healthy families don't need many rules," I said. "But boundaries exist, because something was crossed." He did not respond, and honestly, I did not need him to. For the first time, I was not waiting for permission to feel hurt. I was not waiting for him to agree. I was simply stating what I needed. That was freedom. Ethan was different. His apology never really came. He sent messages occasionally. Some were almost sincere. Others were reminders of what he believed I had taken from him. "You could have helped me. You know Dad was counting on that money. You always make everything about fairness." Eventually, after one message where he brought up my mother in a way that felt intentionally cruel, I stopped responding. Then I blocked him. Not because I hated him, because I finally understood that access to me was not something people automatically deserved. It was something earned through respect. A few weeks later, Nora came to my house carrying a small box. I opened the door and immediately knew what it was. Inside was the old house key. The one I had carried for years. The one that represented family gatherings, childhood memories, and a place I thought I had lost. She also brought my mother's recipe book. The cover was worn. The pages had small stains from years of cooking. I held it in my hands and felt something unexpected. Peace. For months, I thought my father had taken something from me when he sold the house. But standing there with Nora in my kitchen, I realized something. The house was never the only place where my mother existed. The memories were not locked inside those walls. They were in the recipes, the stories, the lessons, the parts of me she helped create. A year after the sale, my life looked different. Not dramatically, not like the ending of a movie, where everything suddenly becomes perfect. Just better, quieter, more honest. I stayed in my townhome and renovated the kitchen into a space I actually enjoyed. I planted flowers in the backyard, and before the old house was sold, the new owners allowed me to take a few cuttings from my mother's peonies. Every spring, they bloom beside my back fence. A small reminder that something beautiful can survive, even after something painful ends. Professionally, I accepted a director position in closing risk management. The promotion meant a lot to me. Not because it proved my family wrong, because it proved something to myself. The things I cared about mattered. The skills my father dismissed mattered. The quiet work I did mattered. I used part of my share from the house sale to create a small scholarship in my mother's name for women returning to school later in life. It was not a huge foundation. It was not something that made headlines. But every year, someone gets a little help because of something painful that happened to me, and that feels meaningful. At Thanksgiving, my table looked different. It was smaller, but it was warmer. Nora sat across from me. Two close friends brought dessert. A coworker joined us. Nobody compared me to Ethan. Nobody told me I should be grateful for being included. Nobody expected me to quietly carry everything. For the first time, I understood what chosen family really meant. It meant being around people who did not need you to shrink, so they could feel comfortable. My father and I still have limited contact. Sometimes he sends a message. Sometimes I answer. Sometimes I do not. The relationship is not what it used to be. But maybe that is okay, because the relationship I had before was built on me trying to prove I deserved respect. The one I have now is built on me knowing I already do. Looking back, the court document protected my ownership of the house. But the bigger victory was something much deeper. I stopped believing that being a good daughter meant accepting anything. I stopped confusing patience with permission. I stopped thinking that walking away from unhealthy situations meant I was abandoning my family. Sometimes walking away is the only way to stop abandoning yourself. And if there is one thing I hope someone listening to this remembers, it is this. You can love people and still have boundaries. You can forgive someone and still protect yourself. You can miss what your family was supposed to be and still build something healthier. Because the truth is, I did not lose my home when my father sold that house. I found one. Not a building, not a property. A place inside myself, where I finally understood that my voice mattered. And that was something nobody could ever take away from me. If you have ever been the person in your family who was expected to stay quiet, keep giving, or accept less than you deserved, I hope you know your story matters too. Share your experience in the comments, and if stories like mine connect with you, consider subscribing for more real-life journeys about family, healing, boundaries, and finding your own strength. Because sometimes the greatest victory is not making someone else regret hurting you. Sometimes the greatest victory is reaching a point where their actions no longer control your peace. The court document saved my share of the house, but the boundary saved the part of me that had spent years asking permission to belong.